Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for EEA's Education Series webinar. Today, we will discuss the state of DAOs and DAO tooling. Today's call is being recorded and will be available to all attendees and the public on the EEA YouTube channel soon after today's presentation. The Enterprise Ethereum Alliance enables organizations to adopt and use Ethereum technology in their daily business operations. The EEA empowers the Ethereum ecosystems to develop new business opportunities, drive industry adoption, and learn and collaborate from one another. We welcome any and everyone to join and be a part of our global community. At this time, we are pleased to introduce Nichanan Kesonpat.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to present on state of DAOs and kind of the tooling landscape in the space to help communities align their goals in a decentralized manner. So just a little bit about me. My name is Nich. I'm currently leading platform and research and content at 1KX. We're an early stage crypto fund funding all across the different verticals in Web3. I'm also a contributor at Metagamma Delta DAO, which is a women-led DAO focused on funding and supporting women-led initiatives and projects in Web3. We've given about 80K in grants so far, and I'm also contributing to Goldman Sachs, which is a NFT collateralized underwriter DAO for lending. And in the past, I was a smart contract developer with a few different projects, Upstate Interactive Agency, and also Mochi DAO, which is a social club. So just a little bit of an overview on what we'll talk about today. We'll talk about the different DAO operations, like verticals, how DAOs are running today and being formed, what they're being formed towards, and how they're kind of operating in a decentralized manner, often with anonymous contributors and paying contributors, diversifying their treasuries, and the tooling that's very quickly emerging to address the different operational needs of DAOs. Everything from value creation, how do we source core contributors, how do we compensate them, how DAOs make decisions, manage their treasury, and then the front end analytics that allows just the external world to get an insight on what's going on in terms of contributions and the progress each DAO is making. This presentation will take around 30-40 minutes, and we'll have some room for questions at the end. So if you have any questions that come up during the presentations, please leave them in the chat, and I'll be perusing them towards the end. And then we'll end with some key takeaways, where the space is going, and then a tooling ecosystem that's growing pretty quickly. So first of all, just a quick introduction on DAOs, right? They've been dubbed a number of different things, whether that's group chats with bank accounts, internet communities, internet native organizations. But at the end of the day, it's just individuals from around the world pulling resources together in order to direct it towards a shared goal, right? So whether that's to build products, and we have all these different DeFi protocols here, like Aave, Maker, Yearn, to collect and play. So we have communities like Flamingo, Squirrel DAO, which is focused on collecting NFTs. And also Yodgo Games, which is a gaming alliance DAO to source scholars for play-to-earn projects, to publish content, to invest in projects, to give grants, which is what Metagamma Delta does, to perform services. So we're seeing a lot of services DAOs forming things like legal consulting, building products, development, and Opolis, which is a HR tooling and resources for DAOs, as well as just to hang out, right? So we see these social DAOs forming now, like FWB, Seed Club, and WYP. So DAOs can form for a lot of different reasons, but in the end of the day, they have they're working towards a collective mission, and just getting individuals from around the globe to share towards that mission and work towards it. So DAO Ops is a budding crypto vertical that still remains underserved. And so there's a huge opportunity to kind of create value in all arms of internet native organizations. So the challenges for DAOs right now is it boils down to how can they lower the barrier to meaningful contributions, how they maintain operational efficiency as they decentralize, Often these DAOs don't start off as DAOs, but just group chats, and then they to build products together, and then they plan on decentralizing over time, and the tools and the operations kind of evolve as the DAO grows. And then once they grow, how do they coordinate decision making at scale? So we have this chart here from our colleague, Peter Pan, which is this path of progressive decentralization, right? That starts off with an initial core team, and then you scale to your first 10 to 20 group of casual contributors, kind of still aligning on the mission and establishing what the milestones that they want to accomplish. And then as it scales, you have these working groups, community-driven working groups to execute towards different organizational functions. So things like product development, marketing, recruiting, as well as things like governance and tokenomics eventually. And then as you scale, the working group kind of scales horizontally as well as vertically. And each one works towards a given milestone with their own budgets and operational goals, which they often have to submit proposals for to the DAO in order to get resources from the Treasury to fund those initiatives. So a lot of DAOs now are kind of entering this stage where they have multiple working groups formed. And there's some early learnings from that process, scaling challenges, as well as examples of how different DAOs are organizing themselves, which we'll be talking about in a second. So if you think about the operational verticals of a DAO, usually just as a mental model from the traditional organizations, often people organize themselves into these different working groups, right? And so it can be anything from engineering, product, treasury management, business development, depending on what the goals of the DAOs are. These working groups organically form and people kind of congregate together depending on their availability as well as expertise. And these circles don't necessarily translate directly to working groups. Some of them are more smaller tasks, which may be more suitable for bounties, one-off contributions from community members that can do something small like publish a blog post for a certain bounty amount that comes out of the Treasury, and then they kind of leave, right? So one of the scales, one of the challenges for DAOs to overcome is how do we translate these one-time contributors to someone who is more long-term aligned with the DAO, who can help the DAO grow and become part of the core team if they wish to do so. So the main theme of DAOs is distributed authority and ownership, right? So unlike traditional organizations where you have a set of founders and founding team members that then form these different departments, we have subgroups of contributors kind of empowered by token holders to work autonomously towards a shared goal. So it's often flat, and these working groups are emergent depending on the needs rather than people actively recruiting and appointing people to be in marketing functions. And decisions are pushed to the edges. So you see these examples here from different protocols in the space. This one is Yearn. So they have like a strategy function, development function, compensation working group to kind of ideate around how to compensate different tiers of contributors. As well as things that are specific to the protocol. So, they're a DeFi yield farming protocol. So they have a group of strategists to form the different strategies. And usually the core product development is kind of based on serving these strategists to create more yield for the protocol. And then this one is for Nexus Mutual. So they have these different hubs doing risk analysis. They are a insurance mutual. So just depending on like the goals of the DAO, like these hubs usually form and aggregate around a shared operational function. So the common themes of these groups are small, typically 10 contributors, and they have decision-making powers within a constrained domain, and they usually have to get buy-in from the rest of the DAO to get additional resources, depending on whether or not they meet their milestones. Members make proposals to form working groups for a specific initiative. It's often time-bound and have defined KPIs and goals and a budget. They're held accountable to the DAO and token holders. They're emergent and needs-based, and they can wind down or consolidate with others once goals are met. So they're very much like a fluid organizational structure that kind of evolves as the DAO grows. Another example from Shapeshift, you can see there's a marketing product development arm. So in terms of like DAO formation, there's different frameworks available now to serve DAOs at a formation stage, right? So at the beginning of, a few years ago, a lot of these DAO frameworks were like all-in-one comprehensive tooling was launched to help DAOs form in a very like all-in-one comprehensive manner. And they, like each of these teams have an idea of what DAOs would become, right? So they often, one of like the older iterations of these protocols often are very kind of monolithic and very like feature rich, and there's no kind of case studies yet on how DAOs operate. But one of the key learnings that has emerged over the past few years is that there's no one size fits all solution to manage DAOs, right? And the structures shift as they scale and needs change, and formation is dynamic, and they also need autonomy, right? So usually, so now like you'll see a lot more modular tooling. A lot of the DAO frameworks now are very lightweight and serve a specific very lightweight function so that the DAOs can plug and play these tools as their needs are met. These tools are often extensible with plugins that DAOs can add on as the needs emerge. They're composable with each other, so different projects are building specific tooling for a function, and then the DAOs can just do like an a la carte selection of what tools make most sense for them. And then they're often also upgradable. So because they're lightweight and DAOs needs change all the time, these tools are often upgradable depending on the evolution of the space. So here we see the pod model, which is pioneered by Orca protocol. So it allows DAOs to form in a very granular way with granular access control for different working groups, right? So each of these pods here are like multi-signature wallets, each with different access control permissions. So you either have to hold a certain NFT or a certain number of tokens. You have to have earned a certain reputation or roles within the DAO. And so each of these multi-sigs will then can be more autonomous and don't have to like report to like a master treasury to get their resource, right? So a lot of the operational decisions and more granular spending is being conducted at this working group / multi-sig level. And then this is an example of extensibility. So this is a DAO framework called DAO House, which is where DAOs that are built on the Moloch framework can extend the functionality of the DAO by plugging it into communication channels like Discord to manage different proposals, and people can vote on members and voting and things like that. So yeah, so now like this is like a marketplace formation of tooling is being formed instead of like this all-in-one monolithic framework that comes with all the features that the DAO may or may not need. In terms of value creation, it's hard to kind of like recruit everyone right from the get-go. So oftentimes DAOs need to find a way to identify what contributions are most valuable to them and design things like bounties and proposals and funding decisions and resource allocation decisions based on what's emergent over the lifetime of the DAO. So while many of these tasks are the same as those in traditional organizations, the core difference is that the opportunity to contribute is wide open, right? Which of course comes with its own challenges. At the beginning, there was this idealistic idea of like decentralized, meaning you don't report to anyone and it's kind of leaderless. But now we've kind of like the space has quickly realized that decentralized doesn't mean leaderless. Instead, it means more people are empowered to take initiatives towards the shared goals, right? And then it's a resource allocation problem to ensure that the most valuable contributions are being compensated in the right way and the different stakeholders are aligned for the long term. And how do we structure incentives and community towards that? So the open questions is basically like, how do we get the right opportunities and information to the right people at the right time, right? If you join Discord today, it's often very messy, and like a lot of things are being communicated asynchronously with a bunch of different channels. So information architecture and kind of documentation is really important in order to onboard the right people and direct them to the right places within the DAO. Then the next step is to how to quantify and incentivize and properly reward value creation. And then how do we foster trust within the DAO through roles and reputation systems, right? And roles and reputation is a really unique one, I think, to the Web3 space, because a lot of these contributors are anonymous, and they take their privacy very seriously. They don't need to, they're very skeptical about things like KYCs and just general legal things in the meat space world. So there's been tooling that's kind of emerging to kind of cater for that, to reduce the friction for these people to be, move across different DAOs and contribute and also be compensated. So oftentimes when you join a DAO, there's often an onboarding process. So part of the work that the core team has to do is maintain knowledge hubs well, facilitate weekly or bi-weekly community calls to kind of get everyone aligned on the progress towards what the DAO is working towards. AMAs, webinars with guests, one-on-ones, especially like one-on-ones onboarding like potential core contributors that the team has identified to be a high value add to the DAO. And then there's things like designing bounties and quests by surfacing bite-sized tasks that adds value to the DAO, whether that's creating memes or writing content, maintaining documentation. So these are like kind of the tasks that are ripe for bounties, right? So we have a lot of bounty platforms emerging in the space now. And then it's up to the DAO to decide on what, how these tasks should be weighted in terms of rewards and compensation. And then connecting individuals to form different work streams. For example, like if I was Yearn, how would I find a UI dev within the DAO if I'm like a data analyst that wants to build a dashboard of like the ecosystem overview of how the protocol is doing. And oftentimes these working group forms like in a decentralized manner, which is why like the kind of peripheral dashboards and tooling with these protocols, if designed well, grows really quickly, right? And there's a lot of peripheral like information hubs that people can find because these contributors are taking their own initiatives to build them. And then what's really important to individuals is that their reputation can grow and be ported towards different protocols, right? If they want to be more of a freelancer and they want to move across different DAOs to do design work, for example. So these reputation, like they would like to export them and kind of have like a decentralized way to like own their own data and also share it with the appropriate people. So reputations right now are in forms of like Discord roles, forum tiers that gives them access, like various levels of read-write access to the DAO's resources, non-transferable reputation tokens that can only be earned, or points that can only be accrued by doing verified work for the DAO. And then you can do things like experience or reputation-based quest eligibility after that too. Yeah, and then so like roles can serve as proxies for trust in the Discord. So usually if you're in a Discord, people often have different roles, and like it just really helps new members identify who to go to if they have questions or if they want to join a work stream. And yeah, so these are just some of the platforms that are available today to address these needs. Gitcoin, Coinbase, and Rabbit Hole are like onboarding platforms to kind of aggregate contributors and direct them to different bite-sized work opportunities that are available. So Gitcoin is more like a developer-facing bounty platform where it's linked to like GitHub issues. So developers can come to Gitcoin and see which issues are development work and GitHub issues are open, and they can contribute that way. And it's directly linked on chain to the bounties that are the compensation that is available. And then, tools to manage contribution and reputation. We have things like Govern, SourceCred, which actually takes GitHub commit information to kind of prove the technical contributions towards the DAO. And then identity platforms that are emerging to help people kind of establish identity in the space. So you may have seen things like ENS. A lot of the times people are known by their ENS names, and then more protocol-based things like IDX, where it's an identity protocol that other tools can then build on top of with this shared identity layer. So in terms of compensation, DAOs are currently compensating contributors in either ETH, stablecoins, governance tokens, or a combination of all three. Compensation can be streamed to them, so like time-based compensation, or it can be bulk distributed or voted via funding proposals. If it's a more hefty piece of work, they often submit a funding proposal for, let's say, 30K for like a 3-month project. And then with defined milestones, and then the DAO can vote on whether or not to allocate those resources from the Treasury towards this initiatives. It can also be unlocked when predefined targets are met. So UMA last year came up with KPI options, which are unlocked when certain milestones are met. Compensation can also be task-based, like via bounties, as we mentioned before, project-based via grants, or role-based via working group leads. And so the role-based ones are oftentimes like established by things like compensation working groups that define the valuable roles or like profiles of contributors that they want to lead a certain initiative, and then have like predefined compensation amount for them. And this is at the discretion of the DAOs, right? So via grants or budgets, or it can be peer-based. So pushing compensation decisions to the edges. So at a working group level, people can like give feedback to the peers that they work most closely with, and that would determine their compensation amount. But that's a really interesting one. I think that is very Web3 native, and I think I'll go into how Coordinate works in a bit. So this is an example of like more of a role-based compensation by DXDAO. So oftentimes they establish the experience levels and a predefined monthly base salary that these individuals get. They can individuals can come in and propose the value that they can add in their expertise to the DAO, and the level of compensation they want, and then the DAO can agree on it that way. So again, like these contribution tools, and then the compensation tools that are available. Savior and Superfluid are streaming protocols that allow you to like set, let's say, a time frame of work, and then that bulk compensation amount is streamed to them over time. So you're actually getting compensated by the minute or by the hour. And then at the end of that work epoch, you get your full amount. And then Disperse is a tool to just have a pool of money and then allocate it to multiple wallets at once. And then now these accounting tools are emerging, like Parcel and Multis, which allows DAOs to handle their accounting, right? And these are often tied to a multi-sig. And so the current challenges, again, is like there's a lack of standards to quantify and qualify value creation, right? Which often creates friction and an oversight if you're attempting to compensate contributors from the top down, because everyone is kind of wanting to contribute all the time. It's hard to keep track of the work that's been done and establishing standards around that. So tools like Govern and Coordinate tries to push decisions to the edges, and Govern helps the DAO kind of identify the core contributions that is important to the DAO at a certain point in time, and then assign weighting towards that, which informs the compensation amounts that the contributors can receive. Another challenge is a lack of HR benefits and payroll services that individuals might expect from traditional corporations. And this is something that's a huge barrier for people to go full-time DAO, right? So there was a Bankless article or a research report that came out recently that the majority of contributors in the space, DAO contributors, are working for DAOs in addition to their full-time roles, and they're kind of hesitating to go full-time DAO right now because of these lack of HR benefits and kind of the types of benefits that they would expect from a traditional organization. So Opolis is a employment collective that is attempting to address that need. So what happens is individuals can come in and become a member of Opolis, and they can work for different DAOs and then can invoice Opolis as a platform, as a one-time a one-time invoice, and then Opolis takes care of payroll, tax, and benefits for them. And the community can decide on things like what healthcare service providers they want to use. So Opolis attempts to decouple benefits and payroll from the organization so that it stays with the individual. So that if you leave a certain DAO, your benefits still stay with you because you're still with Opolis, rather than having to sort out payroll benefits as you move from one DAO to the next, because people are often contributing to multiple DAOs at once, and it can be very operationally intensive for the individual to handle that themselves. So this is an example of how we use Govern at Meta Gamma Delta. So what happened was, as a DAO, we decided on these around 10 types of contributions that we currently value. So we're a grants DAO, right? So we want to do marketing efforts. We want to help push grantees through the funding process, and do things and just simple engagement things like submitting proposals, voting on proposals, and contributing to documentation. So we identified this list of different tasks and assign weightings for them. And every week people can self-report their contributions. And over time we have like a history or a record of what each individual, of how each individual has contributed. And this information can inform things like retroactive compensation or reputation and roles once we have those frameworks in place. So this is Coordinate. So this is Coordinate is a peer-based compensation tools, which allows decisions about the value that each individual has created and pushes towards the edges where the peers that they work most closely with can define, can kind of subjectively allocate the rewards that they want to give their peers, right? So they can define, so what happens is the DAO or the working group defines an epoch, which can be like a week or a month or a quarter. And then at the end of the quarter, individuals can self-report how they contributed to the working group in that quarter. And there's these give tokens, which their peers can then allocate to them, depending on what they subjectively think that their peer has added value for. And then these give tokens then can translate into whatever stable coin or ETH pro rata amount that they want to allocate that way. So this kind of prevents prevents the compensation decisions to be made like from a top-down manner, where it's like unclear what contributors are going to be working towards, and pushes it towards the peers that work most closely with them and have the highest context. So this is a real world kind of screenshot of how we're using Coordinate at Goblin Sachs, right? So the epoch here is from March to April. So this is a 2-week epoch. And these distributed give tokens have been is what's been allocated across the entire core contributor working group. And people can add feedback or comments about how they enjoyed working with you, what things you can do more of, and things like that. So it's a really nice kind of peer-to-peer way to know how you're performing in the DAO. and just like a feedback mechanism of like where you should allocate your attention and efforts to in the next epoch. In terms of decision making, so there's a lot of different governance tools that are emerging right now. Again, we started off with very monolithic tooling that started off as a feature in these all-in-one encompassing DAO frameworks, right? So oftentimes, you add a member, you add members to the project board, and then you can do like voting on decisions that way. So with share-based on-chain voting, with DAO frameworks like Moloch, voting is directly tied to on-chain outcomes, right? So this is what we're doing right now with Metagamma Delta. We're a Moloch DAO. So every grant that we give and every member that we onboard has to be voted on. They come in as proposals that have to be voted on by members. And it's a decentralized way to make decisions because like these voting directly ties to on-chain outcomes, right? So the downside of that is that these tools, because they're on-chain, they incur a lot of layer one gas costs if they're on Ethereum mainnet, which is often prohibitive to wide participation, right? So what happens usually is that they migrate to L2s or side chains to mitigate these gas costs. But again, like these share-based on-chain voting products right now are relatively niche in the industry because of these of the overhead that comes with it. The next iteration of that to address that is doing signal voting. So this is off-chain voting, and then tying that to an admin multisig. So what happens here is that there's a group of, let's say, 3 to 5 multisig signers that have the on-chain say of how to spend the funds that are in the multisig, and then they use signal voting from community members to make decisions on how to allocate those resources. So the good thing about this is that there's no gas costs for on-chain voters, and it's the most lightweight setup. So a lot of the DAOs that are forming nowadays is very lightweight, and they often go with this setup because it's free to set up a multi-sig wallet on Gnosis and add signers. And it's often good enough if you're just like a 10-person community that's taking the first step in decentralizing operations. So the downside of this, of course, is you're at the end of the day relying on these signers to execute on the outcome of votes, right? So even if you're voting off chain to make a decision, there's nothing kind of holding the multi-sig signers accountable for actually allocating resources in the way that the community votes. So I mean, of course, there's like things like social capital that's at risk, but there's no kind of on-chain way to guarantee that it's being executed the way that the community votes. Another way is signal voting plus on-chain voting. So projects like Uniswap go through a proposal life cycle where they do an off-chain temperature check to see how the community feels about a certain decision. And then eventually it translates to an on-chain vote, which oftentimes, the community has in general already agreed with this, and then they can vote on-chain on actually executing on the decision. So here the votes are more meaningful, but again, it's a time-consuming thing. Often these temperature checks and consensus checks takes like a few weeks to process before the vote can be made. So the next iteration of that now is on-chain voting, but instead of like the entire community having to vote on everything, they're pushing decisions to the edges and electing community members that can best represent their interests, right? So oftentimes multi-sig signers are like working group leads or people who are being compensated for the DAO that are voted in by members, and then those people are the ones to make the quick decisions and allocate resources. And then there's tools to keep them in check, right? So oftentimes they're delegating funds and executive authority to these individuals. They're empowering them with skin in the game to make decisions. So reducing the friction of decision making, right? Like the community members don't often have all the context to make the best decision, which is why this delegation pattern is something that more and more DAOs are doing. and it allows experts to execute on their tasks efficiently, but ultimately they're accountable to token holders because their work is being, their work and the milestones are public, and they would have to like report on the work that's been done and things like that. So it's a very transparent process depending on how the DAO is set up. Yeah, so like a pattern, delegation of executive power, off-chain voting is now being tied to on-chain execution. So things like Gnosis's Zodiac module allows the DAO to tie the results from snapshot off-chain voting and translate that into an on-chain execution. So a multi-sig won't be able to execute on a transaction unless the signal voting has passed and told it to like reach quorum and allows it to do so. So yeah, so the main theme is that governance is less about forcing everyone to participate and make decisions, but it's about connecting owners, which means token holders, with stewards who are able to represent their interests. So yeah, this is just some like just the workflow of how this off-chain sentiment can translate to on-chain execution. Claros, Aragon Court, and Tally are ways for people to do dispute resolutions, right? So things like if the DAO has allocated resources to a working group and the working group is not executing as intended, they can raise issues that can then like take the funding away from them as a way to do dispute resolution in a more decentralized manner. So yeah, so the lifetime of a proposal usually starts off from wherever the community lives, whether that's Discord, Telegram, Twitter, and then Discourse is a forum platform where people are posting more comprehensive proposals, and then it goes to either off-chain or on-chain voting, and then execution, and then there's analytics tooling now to kind of help the DAO see how decisions are being made, who is voting, who's being delegated, and who the core contributors are, and who is like actively participating in DAO governance. So in terms of Treasury management, there's billions in DAO treasuries right now, and there's a lot of emergent like accounting and auditing tooling to help DAOs kind of create more of a transparency and allocate budgets depending on what their milestones are. So tools like Parcel, Maltus, Llama protocols, for example, are tools to help DAOs budget, generate performance reports, and then in terms of like treasury management, the idle assets can be plugged into different DeFi protocols to earn yield for the DAO, and these decisions are often made by the a treasury working group or treasury managers that submit proposals on how they want to allocate diversify their treasury, and then this is voted on by the DAO and discussed in these transparent forums. So in terms of like needs, we still need kind of this human readable DAO treasuries, right? Instead of just Etherscan, they're you need kind of transparent front ends that allows people to digest how the DAO is spending its operational budget in a human readable form. It enables the Treasury committee to categorize income and expenses, generate a high level view of the DAO's performance to token holders, and produce real-time financial statements that's verifiable by community members, because at the end of the day, these payments are being made on chain. It also helps with things like auditing, so verifying and evaluating those statements, right? So things like tools that link each transaction from the Treasury with a corresponding governance proposal and budget category and other notes. And then tools that help DAOs do risk management, right? So assessing allocation risk, hedging, insurance, and oftentimes these are the very high value add contributors with the relevant expertise and context to help DAOs make the decision in this way. So eventually we might come up with, a rating system to evaluate the financial health of these different crypto treasuries, right? We often see a lot of reports about how big these treasuries are getting, but not so much about how they're allocating their treasury and like plugging it into different to different DeFi protocols. So it would be a nice way to kind of just like have like a risk score of the DAO's treasury to help them manage their asset allocation that way. So this is an example from a project called Llama Protocol. So you can see that these summary reports have a corresponding amount to them, a specific proposal, and then the transaction hash, and then the category of like how these budgets are being spent. And anyone can go in and download these reports. And then there's tooling that allows you to kind of see the DAO as a whole. So things like who the voting delegates are, who's most active in governance, and it basically just informs the DAO with actionable insights to kind of other resources are being allocated and who like the most high value add contributors are. So these tools are aiming to make the relevant on-chain data presentable, capture meaningful off-chain data, so from things like Discord and Snapshot, and it just helps potential contributors with their decisions on whether or not to join a community. And when they're doing BD with a different protocol, for example, they can generate these reports to see like whether or not the communities are aligned in terms of the decisions that are being made. These front ends can also capture qualitative information, so not just how communities members voted or how delegates have voted, but also like capture their opinions on their votes and kind of like the reasoning on why they voted a certain way. They can identify delegation relationships, like who delegates to whom. And then it just helps large token holders delegate power to people like student groups or funds that actively are active in governance and keep up with the context gathering of what's going on in the DAO. So you can see here from like examples from Sybil and Tally on how different these delegates have voted in the past. So this one is an example from Uniswap. So you can see, student groups and kind of prominent individuals in the ecosystem. They're often being delegated tokens to vote on behalf of community members who are more passive in the community, and they can, transparently see how their delegates are voting. There's a lot of student groups now that are actively participating in DAO governance. And it's a really good learning opportunity for these student groups, right? Because oftentimes these protocols are actually, operating as businesses, and the students can actively participate in building and determining the directions of these communities and protocols. And again, like these front end tools help potential community members see as well the voting profiles of the top advocates for the protocols, right? So you can see that for Gitcoin, it's a lot more driven by individuals and vocal community members like Austin Griffith and Griff Green, who are like leaders in the ecosystem that are very active about pushing the space forward, and they're like often they're founders of different protocols as well, versus something like Compound, which is more like institutional. So a lot of their advocates are, crypto funds. So yeah, it just kind of gives individuals looking at these projects for the first time of like what type of culture these different projects have, and can be more informed that way about who to delegate to and what the social dynamics are of a given protocol. This is something from DeepDAO. So it's basically a leaderboard of the top governance contributors. By the way that this platform defines contributions, right? So here they are ranked by contribution score, the number of DAOs that these individuals are participating in, the votes that they've received, the proposals that they've created, and even the token holdings that they hold. So these individuals oftentimes hold are like big holders of multiple tokens, right? So their incentives are aligned in different ways, and so it's just transparently like seeing how individuals are contributing to the ecosystem as a whole, and gaining reputation and making it visible this way can inform projects that these individuals then want to contribute to afterwards, right? Because it's kind of like a history of the work that they've done in the past for different DAOs, which is why identity and reputation tooling is a really big need in the space right now, to have that in a comprehensive manner where people can plug and play into different DAOs and kind of have an on-chain record or resume of the contributions that they've made in the past. So yeah, just as a summary of what we've spoken about so far and the evolution of how DAOs are operating, you have traditional organizations, which we're all used to. You have shareholders, which elect a board of directors, which then hire the managers, who then manage the individual contributors. Where this was a very scalable and fast and efficient way to do product development and work towards different initiatives. It's a closed ecosystem with rigid participation and a static hierarchy, right? And then we had the first iteration of DAOs, which is the core team, and then kind of these loosely affiliated individual, not even contributors, but more like individual token holders who have different interests and different like time frames of alignment with the DAO. And it's a very like kind of messy process of like loose affiliation with the DAO, and the core team is mainly still driving the decisions. So while it's open and fluid, it's very slow due to disorder. There's no specialization, and it's hard to scale this way. So this DAO 2.01 on the right is kind of where we're at now, with token holders electing these representatives who are actively working in these working groups, who are at that level compensating the individual contributors that are working towards that working group. And then the working group then is held accountable to the DAO, submitting proposals about what they want to on the milestones that they want to execute towards. And then in turn, token holders vote on whether or not to give the resources to them to do so. And this is very fluid. It's very plug and play. The working groups are quite dynamic. There's people going to and from different working groups, and so it's a very emergent hierarchy with defined kind of community elected leaders. It's fast due to it's more adaptable, right? So it's less like a traditional organization where the hiring and firing and management is kind of rigid. And yeah, so this is very adaptable. Oftentimes people are working for DAOs for a few months and then they leave. So yeah, so it's very fluid and adaptable that way. And they can also, it allows for specialization, right? And then in terms of tooling, the tooling that's emerging right now are modular and extensible in order to cater towards this more like fluid, dynamic way of working groups forming. It's very bottom up, but still standardized. And it evolves much quicker than traditional organizations, and a lot more organized than this messy kind of completely flat DAOs 1.0 iteration of the way we did things in the past. And then this is just like a tooling landscape that's quickly growing of the different projects that are emerging in the space to address these various needs. Let's see, what did I not cover? Access, yeah, so a lot of DAOs right now are looking into different access tooling to give permissioned access depending on the tokens that each individual holds, or the events that they've attended, the contributions that they've made, or even their on-chain activity, right? So something like Degen Score looks at things like the DeFi protocols that individual wallets have interacted with, and that gives like a good proxy for how well versed they are in the space, right? So if they're actively using different yield farming products or collecting different NFTs, for example, you can kind of use that as information on how crypto native an individual is, and then give them the appropriate access to resources or reputation that way. That's pretty much kind of a high-level overview of where DAOs are today and the tooling that's emerging to address those needs. And I'd love to open it up for questions. This presentation started off as an article that I wrote a few months ago on everything that's being mentioned here. So you can kind of have a look at the written version here, and you can reach me on Nichanan K on Twitter, and this is my email. And yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So I'll now go on to the chat. We have a few things here. Okay, so am I right in understanding that DAOs are the exclusive domain of ETH? Are there now, or can there be DAOs on BTC? Yeah, so DAOs, so the tooling right now, they often, most if not all of the tooling that has been presented here are on ETH, just because that's where the community is. And the DAO 2.0 kind of comprehensive frameworks were started off as part of the Ethereum community, but they're quickly expanding onto different chains and layer 2s. There's different DAOs forming on chains like Solana, Cosmos, but comparatively very nascent to Ethereum, compared to Ethereum. BTC is Bitcoin is very limited in terms of like the products that can be built on top of it. And I mean, I feel like the DAO culture in general is very driven by the community, or like the culture of the base chain, right? So the culture of Ethereum is very, innovation friendly and, iterating quickly and things like that. So, which is why a lot of the tooling has been emergent from Ethereum, whereas Bitcoin is more conservative, and even like technically it's less, it allows for less composability, right? So it's not exclusive domain of ETH, but mostly on ETH is the answer to that one. They would need to run, okay, I think that was an answer. Okay, can you talk about some of the lessons learned, whether it's DAO takeovers, treasury mistakes, or rush to judgments? So yeah, treasury mistakes is a big one. I don't know how many of you have seen the incident recently where a DAO called Padawan has formed. So Padawan DAO, what it forms is it's a community of people in the Ethereum ecosystem to pool funds to send students to various to various conferences around the world, right? So these students are coming into the DAO and submitting a proposal on like the events that they want to attend and what they hope to learn from it, and then the DAO makes decisions on who to send to things like ETH Denver and things like that. And so they recently, I believe, plugged. They put some of their treasury into Maker or Compound, and that got liquidated, and that kind of drained their treasury. So definitely treasury mistakes there, which is why it's so important to have these things like accounting tools and risk assessment tools, right? Because you're not just you're actively plugging these the treasury into a risky protocol, where Maker and Compound is not risky, but I think the market was kind of turbulent at that time, and they ended up getting liquidated. So the students then that decision was made by Padawan DAO, which is students. So it's a really hard lesson for them to learn. But yeah, that's something that can definitely happen. So yeah, governance processes and just like checks and balances to make well-informed decisions around treasury is a big challenge for DAOs to overcome. Rush to judgments with ENS. Yeah, so this is an example of like how the like private organizations make decisions versus how DAOs make decisions, right? So From what I know about that incident, I believe the private organization ENS, the company that formed ENS, made the decision as a company to let go of that individual. But like the DAO itself has delegated, like the community of token holders themselves have full autonomy and sovereignty over who they want to delegate to, right? So just because Brantley was kind of removed from ENS, the organization, doesn't mean the community has to like undelegate from him. So it's just it's an interesting social dynamic that's forming where companies aren't making the decisions anymore. If the community deems this individual to still add value to the DAO via his expertise, even though his values might not align, then that's just, you know, it's up to the community members at that point. How are the initial coins governance and tasks brought into existence? Must they always be purchased via an exchange or swap? Is there a way to earn them initially? Yeah, so actually, that's a great question, because DAOs are often quick to kind of do airdrops and create tokens, right, without really thinking carefully and intentionally about how to distribute these tokens to the community members that are most aligned with them in the long term. So a part of the pre-token work is to identify core community members and have structures in place like vesting schedules, for example. They can earn reputation not via tokens right away, but it can come in the form of NFTs, which can then, you know, be non-transferable or whatever. And then the people who hold these NFTs, for example, for being a core contributor in like the initial start of the DAO, can then be retroactively compensated after the fact. So if the DAO doesn't have a token, that's completely fine. They can be paid in stablecoin or ETH. And a way to earn them initially is like to earn some sort of like reputation record on things like Govern, or even a POAP for like attending meetings, for example. And that these data sources can then be used to inform token distribution once that strategy has been defined by the DAO. While incentives and bounties are there, can you explain how DAOs are trying to retain and expand their communities and addressing attrition and controlling movement of good contributors to move towards other DAOs? Yeah, so retention is a big one, and attrition is also a big one, because individual contributors are often kind of like getting their feet wet for the first time and kind of like getting the lay of the land, and not right away committing their full time into the DAOs, which is why establishing the culture is really important, because these without compensation from the get-go, oftentimes the culture and the mission and the values are what attracts individuals to the DAO, right? And then it's up to the DAO to design good onboarding structures, to define good conversion structures, and just like kind of designing a good journey, contributor journey to have them become more involved as the time goes on. So this is via reputation systems. This is via, you know, it can also be one-off contributions, but after that, you know, just keeping a record of how these people have contributed in the past, so that they feel like they've invested their time and resources into the DAO and can build their careers that way, and then, you know, convert them into full-time members. And then, yeah, so a mistake that DAOs make early on is if the token distribution is not designed correctly, then you'll just end up attracting a bunch of mercenary mercenary contributors that are, you know, just in it for the token or in it for the airdrop, right? So so the way to control movement of good contributors is to make sure that their incentives are aligned for the long term, and have, you know, structures in place like vesting contracts and things like that. Where do DAOs go when they die? Are there a legal entity for eternity? Do their treasury holdings get stuck? Where do DAO goes when they die? I mean, depending on why they formed, it could be that they've accomplished that, like the mission that they've stuck out to do. They could be merge with different with another protocol, or sometimes if a DAO forms to collectively purchase an NFT, and then like the members aren't aligned on anything other than like purchasing that NFT, then that DAO kind of can die pretty quickly, right? If they're not like aligned on a long-term mission. In terms of legal entity, actually, a lot of DAOs don't form from a legal entity from the get-go. They often form as group chats and avoid the legal hassle until they need to. So it's actually the other way around, where like they use on-chain tooling like multi-sigs and Discord to start, and then only when the time comes where they have to sign contracts in the meat space do they establish a legal entity. And so frameworks like Tribute, Open Law helps DAOs do that. So they're kind of like a connective tissue between the on-chain world and kind of the meat space, and helps DAO form like a legal wrapper around their DAOs, right? But when they get to that point, hopefully they have like operational runway and kind of a roadmap to kind of execute on that. Often they form legal entities for a reason, rather than start off by incorporating an LLC. Good. Are there good onboarding tools that give good templates? It's not like onboarding. It's less onboarding tools right now, and more like good examples of onboarding processes. So so an example is like having good documentation, and weekly calls for MGD was a really good one for us. So in our weekly calls, or town halls, as some community calls it, it really helps to align new contributors to kind of identify the parts of the DAO that they can start contributing towards. And then like those working groups are then in charge of allocating tasks so that they get a lay of the land and what they can first execute on. So these DAOs have like actual like identified community managers that help get people to the right places. Index Coop and Set Protocol, what the founder actually did in the beginning was actually have one-on-ones with potential contributors. And that's an unscalable way, but very effective way to get core contributors involved. So yeah, it's more like the processes, the cultures that you establish to onboard people, rather than tools right now. But one that's relatively new is Wonder. So what Wonder is it's in the contribution and reputation section. What Wonder is kind of like a decentralized Trello, where you have this Kanban board of like the different tasks that the DAO needs to execute on, and then the individuals that are in charge of them, and these are tied to their wallets as opposed to like email addresses and things like that. So these wallets usually have access to things like pay bounties, and decide on which of the bounty submissions are deserving of the bounty reward. So as a new contributor, I can go to a project's Wonder board and like apply to do certain things. Good resources about legal information about DAOs. Yes, there's a article, I think by either Paradigm or Compound. I don't remember the project, but I can find you that resource and give it to you, and I can share it afterwards. But a service DAO called Lex DAO is a service DAO of lawyers who work with different individuals and DAOs to help them navigate this process. I expect that many of these DAO services come with some level of costs. If the DAO doesn't have much in terms of financial assets, is that a barrier to forming a well-structured operation? Should you bootstrap it with open source resources if possible? Yes, so open source resources, a lot of these tools are actually free because they're very emergent. So they're just in the user attraction kind of product market fit formation discovery phase right now. So tooling costs are not as big of an issue right now. So it's the onus is more on these protocols to find a revenue structure that makes sense for DAOs. Yeah, but yeah, out of these, yeah, they're mainly free right now. Yeah, I think that was the end of the questions.
Yeah, we're about 5 minutes over to. Did you have anything else to add before we close out, Nich?
No, I think that covers everything. There was a lot to get through, so sorry if it was a bit rambly, but hopefully you can find the more kind of articulate version of that in the article, and feel free to reach me on Twitter or anything like that. I'm happy to hop on calls to answer questions and dive into some of these things a little bit more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nich, for joining us. That really was a fantastic session. For additional information about joining the EEA, please reach out to membership@eeth-alliance.org, or you can visit our website that's been pasted in the chat for you. You can also follow the EEA on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thank you, and this concludes today's EEA Education Series webinar. Thanks again, Nich.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.